There is a particular sound a stranger's car makes when it pulls into a driveway it has no business being in. I had lived in that house for 40 years, and I knew the voice of every vehicle that had ever crossed that gravel. This one was wrong. It came in too fast, too heavy, too certain of itself, and it stopped directly behind my old pickup truck, as though the truck were something already scheduled for removal. 7 days earlier, I had stood in a rented tuxedo and watched my only son marry a woman with a smile like polished chrome. Now, his wife was standing at the bottom of my porch steps, with a corporate attorney at her shoulder, and she was telling me I had 72 hours to leave the house I had built with my own hands. She did not take off her sunglasses. She did not say hello, and she had no idea that the man she had come to evict was quietly sitting on $90 million that not one living soul knew existed. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who thought your gray hair meant your mind had gone soft with it, stay with me. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if this story finds something true in you, consider subscribing to my channel. I read every comment, and what happened over the next 72 hours is not something I have ever been able to tell in full until now. My name is Walter Hensley. I am 70 years old, a retired mechanical engineer, and for 4 decades I lived in a modest ranch-style house on the western edge of Austin, Texas, in a neighborhood where the oaks had grown old alongside the people beneath them. It was not an impressive house. It was a house built out of memory. Every warped floorboard, every hinge that groaned in the humidity, held some fragment of the life I had shared with my wife, Eleanor. When Eleanor died, she left behind a fortune. She had spent her career as a materials scientist, and late in her life a portfolio of her patents sold for a figure I still have trouble saying out loud. $90 million, placed in a private trust that only I controlled. I never touched a dollar of it. I kept living on my pension. I kept driving the truck. I kept the wealth locked away like a loaded weapon in a drawer, because I wanted my son to build something with his own 2 hands the way I had built mine, and because I had watched enough men be ruined by inheritance to know that money given too easily is not a gift but a diagnosis. It was a Tuesday morning in the middle of August. The heat had already settled over the neighborhood, with that dense, humming weight that Texas gets before 9 in the morning. I was sitting in my living room with the guts of an antique grandfather clock spread across a towel, my reading glasses low on my nose, my hands smelling faintly of machine oil. There is a particular joy in repairing something that has stopped working. You can hold the failure in your hand. You can see exactly where it went wrong. I have spent my whole life chasing that feeling. Then the tires came up the gravel, and the joy went out of the morning. A black Mercedes SUV, pristine, the kind that has never once been asked to carry anything heavier than groceries, the engine cut. The doors opened. Out stepped Vanessa, my daughter-in-law of exactly 7 days, in a white suit sharp enough to draw blood, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses the size of a welder's mask. She did not look like a woman bringing over leftover wedding cake. Her jaw was set. Her posture had the rigidity of someone who has rehearsed a conversation in the car and does not intend to improvise. Out of the driver's side came a man I had never seen. Late 30s, navy suit cut close, thick leather briefcase. He carried himself with the specific forward lean of a man who bills by the hour and has been told the hour is already paid for. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out onto the porch. The planks groaned under my boots the way they always had. I smiled, because I assumed there was some errand, some paperwork, some ordinary post-wedding nonsense they needed a father-in-law's signature for. "Vanessa," I called, shielding my eyes. "This is a surprise. Where's Bradley?" She did not smile back. She came up the stone path and stopped at the foot of the steps, keeping a careful distance between us, the way you might stand back from a man you suspected of being contagious. She did not greet me. She made a small gesture with 2 fingers, and the man beside her stepped forward, and I understood in that instant that she had not come to speak to me at all. She had brought someone to speak for her. The attorney climbed my porch steps. He did not offer his hand. He opened the briefcase, withdrew a thick manila envelope, and dropped it on the patio table beside my rocking chair. The sound it made against the wood was absurdly loud in the still morning. "Mr. Hensley." His voice had the smooth, rehearsed quality of a recording. "My name is Arthur Kellerman. I represent the new owners of this property. I'm here to formally serve you notice." I looked from the envelope to his face, and then to Vanessa, who had found something on my porch railing more interesting than me. New owners, I said. I've owned this house 40 years. The mortgage was paid off 2 decades ago. Kellerman adjusted his tie. He looked at me with a blend of pity and impatience, the expression of a man who has delivered this news before and finds the confusion tedious. Not anymore, sir. The property has been legally transferred and sold. The asset is currently being liquidated. You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings and vacate. If you are still occupying the structure at 8 o'clock Friday morning, the county sheriff will be called to remove you for trespassing. Trespassing in my own house. There was a high, thin ringing in my ears. My brain refused for several seconds to process the sentence as language. I turned to Vanessa. Vanessa, my voice came out low and rough. What is this? Where's my son? She finally looked at me. She sighed the way you sigh at a toddler who has asked the same question 4 times. Bradley's at the office, Walter. He couldn't be here for the drama. The house is sold. It's done. Arthur is just doing his job. You should be packing instead of standing there asking questions that don't have answers you'd like. My hands had begun to tremble. Not from fear. From something else, something with a chemical edge to it. Adrenaline rising through a body that had not been asked for adrenaline in a very long time. I picked up the envelope and tore it open. Deeds of trust, transfer of ownership, sale agreements, dense, correct, professional. My eyes moved through the jargon, looking for the seam, the error, the thing that would let me laugh and call this a clerical mistake. Then I reached the final page and my breath stopped in my throat. A red county notary seal. Beside it, a power of attorney declaration granting full authority to liquidate all real estate assets held in my name. And above the dotted line in black ink, my signature, Walter Hensley, the upward slant of the W, the hard cross of the T, the way the ink trails thin at the end of the Y, a habit I picked up somewhere around 1974 and never lost. It was perfect. A bank teller would have approved it without blinking. A judge would have accepted it without a second look. Except I had never signed that paper. Not once. Not ever. I stood on my own porch in the rising heat and understood that this was not a mistake, not a misfiling, not a bank error. It was a forgery, a deliberate, patient, criminal forgery. And there was exactly one person alive who had the keys to my house, the combination to my filing cabinets, and 40 years of my signature sitting in a drawer to study. My son. Kellerman tapped his watch. I'd suggest you start calling moving companies, Mr. Hensley. The buyers are eager to begin renovations. My card is on the table. Don't attempt to contact my clients directly. All further communication goes through my office. He set a glossy white card beside the envelope. Vanessa turned on her heel, heels clicking sharp against the stone, and walked back to the Mercedes without a backward glance. Kellerman followed. The engine woke. The SUV reversed out of my driveway, and it was gone down the street in a haze of white dust, and I was alone on my porch with the sun on my shoulders and ice in my chest. They had forged a federal document. They had taken the house Eleanor, and I had laid the floors of ourselves on our knees, arguing about the direction of the grain. They were putting me out on the street like a dog that had gotten too old to be worth feeding, because they were certain, absolutely certain, that a 70-year-old pensioner had no money, no leverage, no options, and no fight left in him. I looked down at the forged signature one more time, and something strange happened. The shock drained out of me and left behind a calm so cold and so clean that it frightened me a little. I have spent my life around failure. Not human failure, mechanical failure. Bridges, turbines, load bearings, assemblies that decide after 20 years of faithful service to come apart on a Tuesday. And I learned very early that when catastrophe arrives, you do not stand in the wreckage and weep. You find the point of failure. You isolate it. You understand it. And then you decide what to do with what you know. They thought I was weak. They thought I was slow. They had no idea what they had just woken up. I folded the documents back into the envelope, walked inside, and closed the heavy oak door behind me with a quiet, final click. I had a phone call to make. Inside, the house was perfectly still except for the clock. I had left the grandfather clock half disassembled, but the pendulum was hung and the escapement was ticking, and that steady mechanical heartbeat had always been the sound of peace to me. Now every tick landed differently. 72 hours, 3 days to erase 40 years. I walked into the kitchen and set the envelope on the granite island. The air conditioning kicked on and drew a chill across my sweat-damp shirt. I did not shout. I did not throw anything. That has never been how my mind works. I pulled out a stool and sat down with the calm of a man, reading a blueprint he has been handed at a funeral. I spread the documents across the stone and lined them up square: transfer of ownership, quitclaim deed, eviction notice, and underneath them all the thing that mattered: the power of attorney, dated a little over a month ago. I ran my finger over the signature. It was a masterpiece. Whoever had done this had not rushed, they had studied. But I know my own hand the way a violinist knows the calluses on his own finger. And more than that, I know the physics of ink laid down on paper under pressure. That signature had been drawn, not written. It lacked momentum. A man signing his own name does not think about it. The hand simply goes. This hand had thought about it. It had hesitated in 3 places, each hesitation invisible to the eye and obvious to the pen. But knowing it was a forgery was only the first bolt loosened. The real question was how. Vanessa was cunning enough to conceive of it. I had watched her at the wedding, working the room with a precision that I had mistaken at the time for charm. She had looked at me on that porch, not as family but as an obstacle standing between herself and something she had already decided was hers. But Vanessa did not have keys to my house. Vanessa did not know that my old tax returns lived in the second drawer of the gray cabinet in my study, behind the folder of Eleanor's medical records that I have never been able to throw away. Vanessa had never once been in that room. Only one person had. I want to be honest about the next part, because I think it is the part people underestimate. It did not feel like rage. It felt like grief arriving in the wrong order, grief that had gotten ahead of the death it belonged to. My son was still alive. My son was at that exact moment sitting in an office 30 minutes away in a good suit, and I was mourning him anyway. I made myself think about Kellerman instead, because thinking about Kellerman did not hurt. 72 hours. Why 72? In the actual practice of real estate and eviction law, 72 hours is not a legal timeline. It is a psychological one. It is a number designed to produce panic. It exists to make a man spend his 3 days hunting for cardboard boxes instead of hunting for a lawyer. They wanted me disoriented. They wanted me exhausted and humiliated, hauling black trash bags out to a pickup truck in August heat, so tired by Friday that I would sign anything just to sit down. Because they knew, they had to know, that if I had time to think, if I had time to contest this properly, that forged power of attorney would not survive 10 minutes of a federal judge's attention. Speed was their only real advantage. Speed and the assumption that a widower on a fixed pension could not afford to fight a funded law firm. They assumed I would bow my head, box up my memories, and disappear into whatever low-income facility I could scrape together. The clock chimed the quarter hour, deep and resonant. I was not going anywhere. I stood up, and I felt something I had not felt in years, a current running clean through the whole length of me. But the first phase required control, absolute control. Before I did anything else, I needed to hear my son's voice. I needed to know whether he would lie to me. I walked to the old landline mounted on the kitchen wall, lifted the heavy receiver, listened to the dial tone for a moment, took one deep breath to bury everything burning in my chest, and dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Dad, not hello, not what's wrong, just Dad, calm, flat, entirely unsurprised. The tone of a man who had been sitting beside his phone, waiting for a cue in a script he had already read. That single syllable told me more than the forgery had. Bradley, I said, and I let my voice shake. I let it break a little in the middle, the way an old man's voice breaks. It was the first performance of my life, and I found, to my quiet horror, that I was good at it. What's happening? Vanessa was just here. She brought a lawyer. They gave me papers saying I have 3 days to leave my house. Son, please tell me this is a misunderstanding. I waited for the crack, for the intake of breath, for anything. I got a sigh, a long, theatrical, patient sigh. Dad, calm down. I know it's a shock. I wanted to be there to explain it in person, but the timing got away from me. A pause, calibrated. We've been worried about you for a while. You know that. The fire, the stove, and there it was. I went very quiet, and he took my silence for confusion, and he kept talking, and I stopped hearing him, because my mind had gone somewhere else entirely. 6 weeks ago, a Saturday, Bradley and Vanessa had come over for dinner, which was unusual enough that I had been pathetically pleased about it for 2 days beforehand. Bradley had insisted on cooking. He had put a heavy pot of soup on the front right burner and lit the flame. And then he had turned to me, wiping his hands on a dish towel, entirely casual. and asked whether I still had that set of metric sockets out in the garage. He needed to borrow them, he said. Loose bracket on Vanessa's car. He knew exactly where they were. Bottom of the steel toolbox, back corner of the detached garage, buried under 3 trays of things I have been meaning to sort since the Clinton administration. 15 minutes of work, minimum, in an unventilated garage in July. I had been so happy to be useful to my son that I went out the back door without a flicker of suspicion. I was maybe 4 minutes into digging when it happened, and I did not know it was happening. Bradley had not waited in the kitchen. He had turned that burner to its maximum, ensuring the pot would boil over fast and hard and drown the flame, leaving the gas hissing freely into a closed room. And then he had walked out the front door and driven away. He did not say goodbye. He did not wait for the sockets he had supposedly needed. He left his father to walk back into a kitchen filling with gas. I remember the coughing. I remember my eyes streaming, and the smoke alarm screaming, and the panicked, stupid flapping of a dish towel as I lunged for the knob and shut the line down. I remember standing there with my heart going like a hammer. And I remember that, less than 5 minutes later, Bradley and Vanessa came bursting through my front door, breathless, horrified, saying they had gotten halfway down the street and turned around because they'd forgotten to say goodbye properly and had seen the smoke from the window. 5 minutes. They had never left the street. They rushed to me. They took my shoulders. Vanessa put her hand over her mouth. And Bradley looked me directly in the eyes, with an expression of such perfect, aching, filial concern that I can still see it when I close my own, and asked me why I had turned the stove up that high and then wandered off. And I apologized. I stood in my own kitchen, 70 years old, disoriented and half-poisoned and deafened by alarms, and I apologized to my son for a mistake I had not made. I believed him. I believed him so completely that for 6 weeks afterward I had lain awake at night wondering whether it was starting, whether this was the first crack, whether I was going to become one of those men who leaves the burner on. He had built that doubt into me on purpose, deliberately, with his hands, sitting in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, and my son's voice still murmuring somewhere far away about how worried we've all been. The truth landed in my chest with a force that nearly took the wind out of me. It was not a lapse. It was a staged crime scene. He had manufactured a documented incident of my cognitive decline, at the risk of my life, to lay the paper trail that would make a fraudulent power of attorney look reasonable to anyone who came asking. He had filled his father's house with gas to steal it, and in that moment whatever was left of my paternal affection came apart quietly, like a bolt sheared clean through. "Dad, are you still there?" "I'm here," I said, and I let my voice waver. I made it small. I made it old. "Look," he said, gentler now, warming to it, "the best thing you can do is start packing. Let us handle the rest. It's going to be okay. We're doing this because we love you." I closed my eyes. "All right, son," I said. "All right." I hung up the phone and stood very still in my kitchen, and I understood something clearly for the first time. If I walked into a police station right now, waving a deed and shouting about forgeries and staged gas fires, I would be doing exactly what he had 6 weeks preparing them for. They would look at his flawless documents. They would hear his rehearsed, sympathetic account of his poor father and the stove. And they would look at me, an agitated old man with no evidence and a wild story. And they would be kind to me. And they would be gentle with me. And they would hand me straight back to him. Righteous outrage was a guaranteed road to ruin. They wanted a helpless, compliant, frightened old man. I decided I was going to give them the performance of a lifetime. A mechanical engineer does not trust his eyes. Eyes are for suspicion. Instruments are for proof. I went down the hall to my study and opened the top drawer of the oak desk. My reading glasses, and beside them, a small, heavy brass jeweler's loop I had carried for 30 years. An instrument I had used to find hairline fractures in aircraft-grade titanium. Cracks so fine that a man could put his thumb over one and never know it was there. I carried it back to the kitchen, pulled the power of attorney out from the stack, smoothed it flat against the granite, fitted the loop to my eye, and brought my face down within inches of the paper. I had already read the signature. Now I read everything else. A signature alone does not make a document binding. It requires a witness. It requires a seal. I dragged my focus down to the bottom left corner, where the circular stamp of a Texas notary public had been pressed into the sheet. I tilted the overhead light to raise the embossed ridges out of the blue ink. The notary's name meant nothing to me. some associate on a retainer kept in a drawer for exactly this kind of work. It was not the name that stopped my breath. It was the date block beneath it. The document declared in clean typeface that I, Walter Hensley, had personally appeared before this notary in Austin, Texas, on the 14th of August. I set the loop down on the counter, and I smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile, and I was glad no one was there to see it. My son has an advanced business degree. My son manages corporate accounts with 8 figures in them. My son had staged a gas leak, hired a lawyer, forged a federal instrument, and built a false medical history with the patience of a man laying brick. And then he had picked a date off a calendar without checking. I went back to the study. I bypassed the filing cabinets and went to the tall bookshelf in the corner, where a heavy, weather-beaten leather journal sits on the middle shelf. My fishing log. Since Eleanor died, I have taken one trip a year, entirely off the grid, and I document it the way I documented everything in my working life, obsessively with dates, coordinates, weather, and sketches. Because the recording of a thing is how an engineer keeps it from disappearing. I carried it to the kitchen and dropped it on the island beside the forged deed. The pages smelled of old paper and dried salt. I turned past spring, past early summer, my finger tracking down the margins, and I stopped square in the middle of August. There it was in my own unmistakable hand. On the 14th of August, I was not in Austin, Texas. I was not within 2,000 miles of a notary public. On the day this document swore I had walked onto an office and signed away my home, I was standing on the wet deck of a commercial charter boat off the coast of Homer, Alaska, in a wind cold enough to make my hands stop working, fighting a 60-pound halibut for the better part of 40 minutes, while a man named Duke, whose last name I never learned, laughed at me from the wheelhouse. And here is the part my son had not considered. We were out past every cell tower on the continent. No signal, no email, no call. 5 entire days in which Walter Hensley could not have been reached, let alone have appeared anywhere. I had the plane tickets. I had the charter company's passenger manifest with my name typed on it. I had a credit card charge for rented gear at the marina. And I had 15 other men on that boat, plus a captain and a 2-man crew, every one of whom could stand up in a federal courtroom and swear under oath that I was in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska on the 14th of August, being thoroughly and enjoyably humiliated by a fish. The document was not questionable. It was provably, criminally fraudulent, and it had been proven so by my son's own carelessness. I closed the journal, and a colder thought arrived. There is a rule in structural work that has never once failed me. If you find one critical flaw in a system that was supposed to be sound, you do not fix the flaw. You assume the entire foundation is compromised, and you go looking. Bradley had committed a federal felony to take a house. He had crossed a line most people will not go near in a lifetime. So what else had he touched? He knew my social security number. He knew my mother's maiden name. He knew the name of my first dog in the street I grew up on. He knew the answer to every security question I had ever been asked, because he had been sitting at my kitchen table when I set them. I went to the small spare room I use as an office, sat down at the aging desktop, and pressed the power button. The tower hummed, the fan whirred. I listened to that machine grind its way toward a login screen, and thought about the strange, careful architecture of my financial life. When Eleanor died and the trust came to me, I had made a deliberate decision. I separated the money from the man entirely. I wanted to keep paying for my own groceries. I wanted to keep mowing my own lawn. I wanted to remain in every observable respect exactly who I had always been. So I kept my old local checking account open and active. It held $40,000. That was the accumulated total of my company pension and 40 years of conservative, unremarkable saving. That account was the only financial fact about me that Bradley had ever seen. If he glanced at a statement on my counter, he saw a comfortable, working-class balance and a father who had done all right and nothing more. He believed $40,000 and the equity in a ranch house was the entirety of what his father was worth. The browser loaded. I typed the username. I typed the password. I clicked, and the little circle spun, and I waited with my hands flat on the desk. The dashboard resolved. Available balance. I leaned in until the glow was hard on my glasses. I refreshed the page. The screen blinked, reloaded, and gave me the same number. 0. 40 years of grinding honest labor, wiped clean. I want to be clear about what I felt because it surprised me. It was not panic. The money meant nothing. I had $90 million sitting in a trust managed by people who charge more per hour than that account had ever earned in a year. I could have lost $40,000 every day for the rest of my life and never noticed the draft. It was the audacity. He had forged a deed to take the roof over my head, and then he had reached into my pocket and taken the last dollar in it too. Not because he needed it, because it was there, and because he had decided I was already a corpse and corpses do not need pocket money. I clicked into the transaction history. I needed the mechanism. I needed the shape of it. Months of ordinary life scrolled past. Groceries, electric bill, pharmacy. A man's whole modest existence rendered in $5 increments. And at the top of the ledger, an outgoing domestic wire, initiated and cleared the previous afternoon. $39,985, leaving behind the $15 the bank took for the privilege. I clicked to expand the routing detail. The money had gone to a commercial holding account in Detroit, Michigan. And in the optional memo line, my son had typed 4 words. Medical facility deposit. My hands closed into fists on the desk. My fingernails went into my palms, and I did not notice until later, when I found the marks. They had used my own stolen pension to finance the story of my own decline. They were moving my money in a way that would look, to any auditor, like a devoted family responsible for securing their father's place in a good, assisted living center. It was a beautiful piece of work. It was cynical to a degree that I had not believed my son capable of. And I sat in that chair and made myself look at it until I could think again. Then I went back to my study, moved the rug, and opened the floor safe. Inside was a heavy black case I had not touched in 3 years. Inside the case was a satellite-encrypted phone that had been given to me by the woman who administers the Hensley Trust, on the condition that I keep it charged and never explain to anyone why I had it. Her name is Dana Whitfield. She is a forensic financial attorney. She is the most formidable person I have ever been in a room with, and Eleanor hired her 11 years ago, after interviewing 9 candidates and finding all of them insufficiently frightening. I powered on the device, waited for the handshake, and dialed. She answered in 2 rings. Walter, no pleasantries. Dana has never once said hello to me. This line is for emergencies. What's happened? I looked out the study window at the oaks and the heat shimmering off my driveway, and I told her. I told her about the porch and the 72 hours and Kellerman. I told her about the forged signature and the notary date and the fishing log. I told her about the burner turned to maximum and the boy who did not wait for his sockets. And I told her about the 4 words in the memo line. When I finished, there was a silence on the line long enough that I checked the screen to see if the connection had dropped. Walter, Dana said finally, and her voice had changed. The professional distance was gone out of it. I am obligated to say this once, and then I will do whatever you tell me. This is a federal matter. Wire fraud, forgery of a notarized instrument, elder financial abuse. I have a direct contact at the Bureau's regional office. I can have agents at your door by dinner and your son in custody by morning. Not yet, I said. Walter, not yet, Dana. I sat down in the leather chair and watched the dust turn in the window light. Because I don't know how deep it goes, and neither do you. If we move now, we get him for the house. He hires a good lawyer and cries about his father's confusion and takes a plea. And in 4 years he's out and I'm dead of something, and none of it ever gets said out loud. I paused. I want to know everything first. I want the whole shape of it before I touch a single piece. Another pause. Shorter. What do you want? Everything, I said. Bradley, Vanessa, Kellerman. Bank records, credit reports, mortgages, tax filings, the corporate registration on whatever it is Vanessa claims to do for a living. I want the money. I want to know where it comes from and where it goes and who they owe. Full forensic reconstruction. That's not a small ask on a Tuesday. Eleanor told me you'd say that. She also told me you've never once failed to deliver. I heard something on the other end that might, in a woman less disciplined, have been a laugh. Give me until 2 in the morning, Dana said. And Walter, whatever performance you're planning to give those people in the meantime, give it well. Don't let them see you thinking. Dana, I said, I have been letting people underestimate me for 70 years. It's the only talent I have ever really had. I ended the call, put the phone back in the safe, and went out to the garage for cardboard boxes. If they wanted a broken old man packing his life into cheap cardboard, they were going to get one. I stacked them in the living room where the window would show them off. I filled 3 of them badly, with the lids not quite meeting, The way a man packs when his hands are shaking and his heart is gone. Then I sat down in the wreckage of my own staged surrender and waited for 2 in the morning. The invitation came that afternoon, and I understood immediately that it was not an invitation. Vanessa called the landline. Her voice had been reassembled into something almost warm, which frightened me more than the sunglasses had. "Walter, I've been thinking. There are things in that house that shouldn't go into storage. Photo albums, Eleanor's things. Why don't you bring a box over to the penthouse tonight and we'll keep them safe for you?" Safe for you. She wanted the photographs. Not out of sentiment, out of housekeeping. A man who has been declared incompetent and shipped somewhere does not need pictures of himself standing upright in his own life, and she wanted them somewhere she controlled, in case anyone ever went looking. "That's kind of you," I said, and made my voice thick. "That's very kind, Vanessa." She gave me an hour like a doctor giving an appointment, and hung up. I went to the workbench in the garage. I want to say clearly that I did not own surveillance equipment. What I owned was 30 years of building small things with small tolerances, a drawer of voice-activated recording I had bought a decade ago to dictate notes in the field, because my handwriting had started to lose an argument with my arthritis, and an afternoon. I spent that afternoon with a soldering iron, a magnifier on a stand, and 2 of those recorders, stripping them down to the board and rebuilding them into something the size of a domino, with adhesive backing and enough battery to run for a week on voice activation. It was, I will admit, the most fun I had had in 3 years. My hands did not shake once. There is a lesson in that somewhere about what happens to an old man when you finally give him a problem worth solving. At 7 that evening, I drove my truck downtown and pulled up beneath a glass tower with a valet stand, carrying a heavy wooden chest of photo albums that I had made no attempt to lighten. The door opened and Vanessa looked at me with her eyes narrowing into pure, unmasked disgust. Not hatred. Hatred would have required her to consider me a person. This was the face you make at a piece of furniture that has been left in a hallway. "Come in," she said, stepping aside without offering to take a corner of the chest. "Put it somewhere out of the way. Don't scuff the floors." I shuffled forward. I rounded my shoulders. I shortened my stride into the small, uncertain steps of a man who no longer trusts the ground. I clutched the chest awkwardly high against my ribs and let my hands tremble just enough to sell it. And as I crossed that vast, sunlit, soulless living room, I dragged my left boot deliberately across the edge of a Persian rug. I stumbled. I gasped. The chest went down out of my arms and hit the floor with a crash, and half a dozen thick leather albums spilled out and slid across the polished wood, fanning open, spilling 40 years of Christmases across her beautiful floor. "Oh, for God's sake!" Vanessa's eyes went to the ceiling. "I'm so sorry." I dropped to my knees with a clumsiness I had practiced in my own hallway that afternoon. "Vanessa, I'm sorry, my hands just aren't working today. I'm so confused, everything's so." I let it trail off into nothing. I began gathering the albums with slow, shaking, useless hands. She stood directly over me and did not help. She watched me crawl on her floor, and her face was a portrait of contempt so complete that I remember thinking with a strange detachment, "There it is, that is what my son married, and he cannot even see it." She opened her mouth to say something else, and her tablet rang. She looked at the screen, and her whole body changed. It was the call she had been waiting for. The contempt evaporated, and underneath it, for one unguarded second, I saw the thing she had been hiding under the white suit and the sunglasses and the Mercedes. She was terrified. "Clean this up and leave the box in the corner," she snapped. "I have to take this. Don't touch anything else." And she turned her back on me and walked fast toward the far end of the kitchen, already talking, already raising her voice. That was my window. The old man vanished. I do not know how else to describe it. One moment I was a trembling thing on the floor, and the next I was moving with the economy of a man who has spent his life reaching into machines. And I have never in my life been so aware of the sound of my own blood. I slid to the base of their enormous sectional, reached underneath into the dark, found the solid crossbeam of the frame, and pressed the first device against the wood until the adhesive took. Dead center of the room. It would hear everything that was ever said in that space. Then I gathered the albums, set them in the chest, pushed the chest neatly against the wall, and stood. Vanessa was still pacing the kitchen with her back to me, arguing furiously with someone about a delayed wire transfer. I walked quietly down the hall toward the master suite. I knew the layout. I had been given the tour in June when they bought the place, when Bradley walked me through room by room, watching my face for envy. Off the main bedroom, he kept a private office, soundproofed, glass-walled, immaculate. If two people were going to discuss the destruction of a man's life, they would not do it in the living room. They would do it in there, behind a closed door, in the room built for privacy. I slipped inside, a glass desk. 3 monitors, nothing on the walls. It was the office of a man who had no interior life to decorate with. I did not touch the drawers. Drawers are for amateurs and drawers get searched. I needed a listening post that would never be found by anyone who was not actively looking for one. There was a small private bathroom off the office. I stepped in, reached around behind the porcelain toilet tank, into that narrow gap between the tank and the wall that nobody has cleaned since the building was constructed, and pressed the second recorder home. Then I walked back down the hall, and by the time I reached the living room I was hunched again, defeated again, an old man waiting to be dismissed, and Vanessa was just ending her call. "Are you still here?" she said. "I'm going," I said. "Thank you for keeping them safe, Vanessa." She did not answer. She was already looking at her tablet. I rode the elevator down alone. I handed the valet my ticket, and kept the broken gate all the way across the lobby, and out under the awning and into the cab of my truck, and I did not straighten my spine until the door was shut, and the glass was between me and the world. Then I sat up. I put my hands on the wheel, and I found they were perfectly steady. The Trojan horse was inside the walls. I drove home through a city that had no idea what had just happened in it. The grandfather clock was chiming midnight as I came through my front door and walked past the staged cardboard boxes and down the hall to my study. I left the overhead light off. I turned on the small brass desk lamp, opened the floor safe, took out the satellite phone, set it in the center of the blotter, and waited in the dark. At 2 in the morning exactly, it lit up. An encrypted package from Dana Whitfield. I entered the decryption key and watched the bar fill, and then I connected the phone to my desktop and opened the dossier, and Dana's team had done in 18 hours what I would have thought took a month. They had taken my son's life apart down to the fasteners. I scrolled through it slowly, opening folders one at a time. Bank statements, credit reports, mortgage instruments, tax filings, margin call notices. And the deeper I went, the more the spreadsheets bled red. I had expected debt. I had expected a couple of overextended credit lines, a second mortgage underwater, the ordinary financial hemorrhage of 2 people who had bought a life they could not afford. What Dana had found was a crater. I opened the subfolder marked with Vanessa's name. For 4 years I had listened to that woman hold court at family dinners about her career. Independent corporate strategy consultant. She said it the way other people say their own name. She talked about flights to Denver, about clients she could not name, about venture capital dinners, and I had sat there and been quietly impressed because I am an engineer, and I do not know what a strategy consultant does, and I assumed that was my failing. She was not a consultant. The business registration was an empty shell, a corporate entity with no clients, no revenue, no employees, and no purpose except to give a name to the thing she actually did all day, which was sit in that penthouse and day trade. And she was catastrophically bad at it, 4 years of it. Leveraged positions in commercial real estate, margin stacked on margin, the classic escalation of a person who is not gambling for money, but for the feeling of being right. She had started small, covering early losses out of Bradley's bonuses. Then she had drained their joint savings. Then she had liquidated their retirement accounts, quietly, one at a time. Then she had taken loans against the cars. And then the market had turned the way markets do, and every leveraged position she held had imploded at once. At the bottom of the folder, Dana had compiled a single consolidated balance sheet. 1 page, 1 number at the foot of it. Negative $2.5 million. I sat back in the chair and looked at that number for a long time. $2.5 million. The $40,000 they had taken out of my pension account, the entire lifetime earnings of a working man, was not a windfall to them. It was not even a payment. It was a rounding error. It was enough to pay a crooked lawyer's retainer and buy about 9 days of silence from somebody. But the true horror of it was not the size of the debt. It was the name of the creditor. The file was labeled, in Dana's characteristically unsentimental style, Priority Threat Assessment. Her team had traced the origin of the high-interest loans Vanessa had taken to cover her early margin calls, and the trail did not lead to a bank. It could not have. No regulated institution on earth would have written that paper. Banks have limits and collateral requirements, and compliance officers whose entire function is to prevent exactly the loan Vanessa needed. So she had gone around the banking sector entirely. The money had come out of a private lending operation, working out of an industrial corridor in Detroit. Not a firm, not a fund, an operation. The kind of men who do not send collection letters, because a letter is a document and documents can be read aloud in a courtroom. They charge interest rates that would be illegal in every state in the Union, and they enforce those rates using methods that make regulation unnecessary. Dana's team had pulled the intercepted correspondence off Bradley's private mail server. The messages from Detroit were 4 and 5 lines long. There was no letterhead, no greeting, no profanity, no threat that a prosecutor could ever have called a threat. They were models of restraint. That was what made them terrifying. The last one had arrived 4 days before the wedding. They had given Bradley and Vanessa 10 days to produce $1 million as a demonstration of good faith against the principal, and then a single closing sentence, which I read 6 times, about how it would be a shame for a man to begin his marriage under a burden he could not carry. I sat back in the leather chair, and the entire architecture of the last 72 hours rearranged itself in front of me, and I understood, finally, what I had been looking at. None of this was greed. The 72-hour eviction, the forged deed, the $40,000 taken out of my account with 4 words in the memo line. The gas leak 6 weeks ago, before any of the rest of it had even begun. It was panic. It was a man 10 days from having his knees taken apart in a parking structure, doing arithmetic at 4 in the morning, and arriving at the only asset he had left that he had not already destroyed. His father. He was going to liquidate my house, take the equity, and use 40 years of my life to buy back his own. I should tell you what I felt at that moment, and I am not proud of it. But I promised myself, when I started telling this story, that I would not lie in it. I felt powerful. They were bleeding out. They were terrified of a predator they could not negotiate with. They were running a con on a man they believed had nothing, and I had $90 million and a satellite phone and a woman in a distant office who had never once failed to deliver. I could have solved their entire nightmare with a single wire transfer before breakfast and never felt the loss. I sat in the dark and let the noose keep tightening, and I felt nothing at all about it, and that is the part that should have frightened me. It did not yet. Tomorrow I would listen to what they said when they thought no one could hear them. They had invited the architect of their ruin into their living room and asked him not to scuff the floors. I woke long before the sun. The grandfather clock was striking 5 when I carried my first cup of black coffee down the hall to the study. I sat down, opened the black case containing the receiver, and plugged in a pair of heavy noise-canceling headphones. I settled them over my ears, and the ambient hum of my own house dropped away into absolute silence. I turned the frequency dial to the channel assigned to the device behind the toilet tank in Bradley's office. Static. A soft, rhythmic hiss like surf a long way off. I closed my eyes and waited with the patience of a man who has spent whole days watching a pressure gauge fail to move. Then, at 6 minutes past 6, the static broke. A door slammed, hard enough that the microphone clipped. I leaned forward and pressed the cups tighter against my head. The audio was startlingly clean. I could hear leather shoes crossing hardwood, fast, uneven, back and forth and back again, and I could picture him perfectly in that glass box of an office, wearing a track into a floor he did not own. He was not pacing like a man thinking. He was pacing like an animal testing the wall. Then, ice against crystal. Liquid poured too fast and too much. 6 in the morning. He was pouring whiskey at 6 in the morning, in a house where the sun had not yet cleared the neighboring tower. The pacing continued, faster, and then the door opened again. "Have you lost your mind, Vanessa?" And every trace of the honeyed thing she used in public was gone. Her voice was flat and venomous, and I understood in one syllable that I had never once heard this woman speak. Not at the wedding, not at any dinner table, not ever. It's barely 6 and you're pacing a hole in the floor drinking scotch. Pull yourself together before you ruin this. Before I ruin it. Bradley's voice came back cracked and high, a register I had not heard from him since he was 15 years old. Do you hear yourself? Do you actually hear the words? I committed a federal felony, Vanessa. I forged my father's signature on a notarized instrument. I sold his house out from underneath him while he sat in it. Do you understand what we've done? This isn't borrowing from a friend. This is real estate fraud, and it has a number of years attached to it. I sat in my study with my eyes closed and let my son's full, uncoerced confession pour directly into my ears, and I want to tell you that it was satisfying, and it was, for about 4 seconds. And then it was only the sound of a boy I taught to ride a bicycle, explaining why he had ruined himself. Keep your voice down. Vanessa's words came out serrated. Do you want the whole building to hear? It's done. The paperwork was accepted, the notice was served, and your father swallowed every word of it. He is sitting in that house right now, packing his life into cardboard, because he is convinced his own mind is failing him. We have the high ground. Stop behaving like a frightened child and start behaving like a man who intends to survive the week. Survive. Ice rattled. His hands were shaking. I could hear it. We're drowning. I took $40,000 out of my father's retirement account yesterday afternoon. 40,000. That's 40 years of a man getting up at 5 in the morning, and I moved it in 90 seconds to make one interest payment on your leverage. One, it doesn't even touch the principal. That money is gone, Vanessa, and it bought us 9 days. Then get more. There isn't more. His voice broke completely. That was everything. That was the whole man. Do you understand? I have taken everything my father has, and it is not enough. There was a silence on that recording, and I have listened to it many times since, and I can tell you that in that silence a marriage of 8 days was finished, and neither of them noticed. Then we take the house, Vanessa said. The house is $400,000 in equity if we're lucky, and it takes 60 days to close, and we don't have 60 days, we have 9. Then we take the house, she said again, in exactly the same tone, and we do the other thing. And Bradley said nothing at all. I opened my eyes in the dark of my study. I did not know yet what the other thing was. But I heard the shape of the silence that followed it, and I felt the temperature of my own blood begin to drop. And I sat perfectly still in that chair with my coffee going cold beside me, and waited for my son to speak. It took him 11 seconds. No, he said, but he said it quietly. He said it the way you decline a second drink you are already reaching for. And she heard it too. I know she did, because when she answered, there was no argument in her voice at all. There was only patience. We'll talk about it tonight, Vanessa said. The door opened, the door closed, and the static came back up like water closing over a stone. I took the headphones off and set them on the desk, and sat in the gray dawn light with my hands flat on the blotter. And for the first time since the Mercedes came up my driveway, I was afraid. Not of losing the house, not of Kellerman, or the sheriff, or the 72 hours. I was afraid because I had just heard my only son say no to something, and I had heard underneath it that he did not mean it. I waited all day. I want you to understand what that day was. I sat in a house I had been told to leave, surrounded by boxes I had packed as theater, listening to a clock I had not finished repairing, waiting to hear whether my son would agree to kill me. I ate a sandwich at noon. I could not tell you what was in it. I watered Eleanor's ferns on the back porch because she had loved them, and because a man has to put his hands on something. At 3 in the afternoon, I found myself standing in the doorway of Bradley's old bedroom, which I had never converted into anything, looking at a shelf of trophies from a swim team he quit in 1998. I thought about the possibility that I had misheard. I thought about the possibility that the other thing was bankruptcy, or fleeing the country, or some financial maneuver I was too old and too honest to recognize. I did not believe it, but I thought about it because he was my son, and because 70 years teaches you that hope is not a virtue, it is an involuntary muscle. At 9:14 that night, the receiver came alive. They were in the office. The door was closed. I could hear the particular deadness of a soundproofed room, that flat acoustic that tells you the walls have been paid for. Not enough, Bradley, Vanessa was saying, mid-sentence. You're standing in front of a burning building calculating the cost of an extinguisher. The $1 million we hand Detroit on Monday morning is a good faith deposit. It stops them from breaking your legs. It doesn't buy your freedom. We'd still owe 2.5 in principal, and the interest compounds weekly at a rate they invented. The house equity barely covers the blood money. Once the bank takes its cut and the local creditors take theirs, we are left with nothing. We lose this apartment. We lose the cars. We are ruined, and we are ruined while still owing money to men who do not accept apologies. So we're finished either way. Bradley's voice was hollow. No. We're finished one way. There's another. A pause. I heard him swallow. But sending him down there, he stammered it. The words came out in pieces, knowing what they do. Knowing how they keep them medicated until. He stopped, he tried again. Vanessa, that isn't fraud. That is not fraud. If anyone ever looks, if any authority ever looks closely at that place, that's a homicide charge. I can't have that on me. I cannot sit in this apartment and wait for a phone call telling me my father is dead. You won't be waiting for a phone call, Vanessa said. Her voice had gone smooth. It glided. I have heard that tone exactly once before in my life, from a man selling something he knew was defective. You'll be waiting for a payout. I gripped the edge of my desk with both hands. What are you talking about? Bradley whispered. 6 months ago, when I first understood my positions were collapsing, I made a contingency. She said it with pride. That is the detail I have never been able to shake. There was pride in her voice, the pride of a woman presenting elegant work. I contacted a private broker who writes high-risk underwriting and doesn't ask questions that would embarrass anybody. I used the power of attorney and a set of medical evaluations I had prepared, and I took out a policy on your father. The microphone caught Bradley's intake of breath. A sharp rattling gasp, a life insurance policy. His voice had gone to almost nothing. On my father, for how much? $5 million. And there it was. There was the number, $5 million. Delivered flat and clean, the way you'd read a closing price. It's ironclad, Vanessa continued, warming now, enjoying it. But there's a stipulation regarding his age and his pre-existing conditions, and that's the part you need to understand. If he passes naturally, in a care facility, under documented medical supervision, the payout is expedited and unquestioned. Nobody investigates an old man with a documented decline who dies in a bed. That is exactly why we are not sending him to a licensed facility where doctors ask inconvenient questions and try to prolong things. That's why I found the place near the border. It's off the books. It's 10 miles north of the line, and they cater specifically to families who need an elderly relative to quietly stop being a problem. Within a month, his heart fails under the chemical stress. It's natural. It's documented. They issue a death certificate. We file the paperwork. The carrier wires $5 million into the offshore account, and Detroit is gone forever. We clear the 2.5, and we keep the rest, and we rebuild. I sat in my study, 70 years old, listening to my daughter-in-law explain the mechanism of my own execution, as though she were walking a board of directors through a slide deck. They were not stealing my house. They were not abandoning an old man to save themselves from a bad bet. They had priced the remainder of my life at $5 million. And Vanessa was executing the transaction with the placid competence of a woman rebalancing a portfolio. And the only variable still unresolved was whether my son would sign. I sat frozen with the headphones pressing into my skull, and I waited for him to break. I waited for the boy I raised to stand up in that room and put his hands on her and throw her out of the building. I waited for him to scream. I waited for one word, one syllable, one involuntary human sound of refusal. I listened to him breathe. $5 million, Bradley said slowly, and I heard it happen. I heard the horror in his voice curdle in real time into something else. Into arithmetic. Into relief. That clears everything, he said. That clears Detroit. That clears the mortgages, the credit lines. That clears the entire board. Yes, Vanessa purred. It clears the board, but only if you hold your nerve. Only if you put him in that van on Monday morning and never look back. There was a long pause. I want to tell you that I prayed. I have not been a praying man since Eleanor's diagnosis, but I sat in that chair with my eyes squeezed shut and I asked a universe I do not believe in to let my son be a man for 4 more seconds. Okay, Bradley whispered. We send him to the border. I reached up and pulled the headphones off my head. The house was silent. The clock ticked in the hall. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. I want to describe what happened inside me, and I do not have adequate language for it, so I will use the only vocabulary I have ever trusted. There is a moment in a failure analysis when you stop looking for the crack and admit that the material itself was never sound. That what you are holding was not a good component that broke. It was a bad component that had, until now, simply not been asked to bear weight. My son did not break in that room. My son was revealed. The grief I had felt on Tuesday, that premature, disordered grief, arrived properly. I sat in the dark of my study and I mourned my only child, who was alive, 30 minutes away in a good suit, and who had just agreed to kill me for money he was going to lose anyway. And when the grief had passed through me, I found that underneath it there was nothing left at all. No love. No rage. Nothing but a clean, level, empty surface. The gloves were off. A normal man calls the police. A normal father hands over the recordings and lets the system do what the system is built to do. I picked up the satellite phone. I dialed Dana Whitfield. It was 9:41 on a Thursday night. Walter. They took out a $5 million life insurance policy on me, I said, using the forged power of attorney and fabricated medical evaluations. There is an unlicensed facility 10 miles north of the southern border. They intend to put me in a van on Monday morning and have me sedated until my heart stops. My son agreed to it 11 minutes ago. I have it on tape, all of it in his own voice. The silence on the line was total. When Dana finally spoke, every trace of the professional had burned off her voice, and what was left underneath was pure, sharpened rage. Walter, I am calling the Bureau, right now, tonight. I have agents on your street within the hour, and both of them in a federal holding cell before sunrise. And I am not asking you, I am telling you, because this is no longer a fraud matter, this is conspiracy to commit murder, and I will not have you sleep another night in that house. Call them, I said. She stopped. I think it surprised her. Call the Bureau, I said tonight. Get them everything. The recordings, the notary date, the fishing log, the manifest from the charter company, the wire to Detroit, all of it. I want federal agents in my living room on Monday morning at 8 o'clock, and I want them out of sight until I say otherwise. Then what are you asking me for? Dana said slowly. That isn't that. I looked out my study window into the dark of my own backyard, at the shape of the oak that Eleanor had planted the year Bradley was born. I want you to buy the debt, I said. There was a pause. Say that again. $2.5 million in Detroit. I want it purchased. Not paid, purchased. I want your intermediaries to make contact with whoever holds that paper and offer them the full principal in cash. Immediately, no negotiation, no discount, tonight. And I want the promissory notes legally assigned to a private holding corporation that I control. Walter, Dana's voice was very careful. Those are not people who use contracts. They use them among themselves. Every predator keeps a ledger, Dana. That's the whole reason they're predators. They take the ledger seriously, and nobody else does. I sat forward, and because they operate outside the law, they are driven entirely by liquid cash. They don't want to break my son's legs. Breaking his legs is an operating expense. It produces no revenue. If a stranger offers them their entire principal back in cash this week, they will take it before you finish the sentence, and thank you for the convenience. You want to pay off your son's loan sharks. Genuine bewilderment. Why on earth would you save them? I'm not saving them, I said. I'm purchasing them. I listened to Dana Whitfield exhale. You want to own the axe, she said quietly. It's already swinging, I said. I just want my hand on the handle. How fast can you move? For a lump sum buyout at full principal, they'll move within the hour. I'll route the funds through 3 separate entities so the origin stays anonymous. As far as Detroit is concerned, a larger and more aggressive group bought out their local interest, which happens every week and interests them not at all. A beat, Walter. I want to say one thing. Say it. I've administered this trust for 11 years. Eleanor told me once that the reason she put all of it in your name, and none in his, was that you were the only man she'd ever met who could hold that much money, without it changing the shape of him. Another pause. Don't let it change the shape of you tonight. I did not answer her for a moment. Buy the debt, Dana, I said, and I ended the call. She called back at 11:52. It's done, the wire cleared. Detroit accepted the buyout without a single question. The intermediary said the whole call took 4 minutes, and the man on the other end sounded relieved. They've signed over the physical notes and every ounce of leverage they held. They are out of the picture entirely. A pause. Walter, as of 11 minutes ago, your son and his wife owe no money to the criminal underworld. They owe $2.5 million to you. The first million is due Monday morning, and when it isn't produced, the holding company has the immediate and unconditional right to seize every asset they have. I thanked her and set the phone down on the blotter. I sat in the dark and looked at it. They were going to walk into my house on Monday morning with a moving truck and a lawyer, entirely confident, expecting to find a weeping old man surrounded by cardboard. They were going to load me into a van. They had picked out the room I would die in, and there was a part of me, I am going to be honest, Because this is the part of the story I actually need you to hear. There was a part of me that was looking forward to it, that had begun somewhere between Tuesday and Thursday to enjoy this, that wanted to see my son's face at the exact moment the floor left him, that had stopped being a man defending his life and started being something else, something with an appetite. I sat with that for a long time. I am not going to pretend I resolved it that night. I did not. Monday came up clear and bright, the sky over Austin painted in long strokes of pink and gold. I stood at the bay window and watched the light spill across the lawns of my neighbors, who were making coffee and finding shoes and knowing nothing. 8 o'clock. The quiet broke with the grinding gears of a commercial moving truck. It parked square across the mouth of my driveway. The brakes hissed, the engine died. Behind it, a silver sedan pulled to the curb and Bradley got out. Good suit. Good shoes, every inch of him the successful executive. Vanessa came out the passenger side clutching her handbag, her face set in an expression of grim put-upon annoyance, like a woman who had a full day ahead, and this was the tedious part. A third car. Arthur Kellerman, hauling his briefcase off the back seat, adjusting his tie, wearing a smirk I could see from 40 feet away. They gathered on the sidewalk and exchanged a few brief words. They were entirely confident. Why wouldn't they be? I turned from the window and walked to the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I was not wearing flannel. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit of Italian wool that had hung in a cedar closet since a board dinner in 2009. I adjusted the collar and set the knot of a burgundy silk tie and slid Eleanor's last anniversary gift, a platinum watch I had never once worn, onto my left wrist. The man in the mirror was not the man they were coming to collect. I walked out to the living room. Dana Whitfield was standing by my recliner. She had arrived an hour earlier through the back gate, a compact woman in her 50s in a black suit with a silver tablet under her arm and an expression that could have stripped paint. Behind her stood 2 men in dark suits, quiet, unhurried, their jackets hanging open just enough to show the federal badges clipped at their belts. They had been in my kitchen since 7 drinking my coffee and saying almost nothing. I poured myself a cup and sat down in the leather recliner and crossed my legs. The staged boxes sat by the window, lids gaping exactly where a broken man would have left them. We waited in complete silence. Less than 2 minutes later, I heard the metallic scrape of a key going into my front door. The door swung inward and hit the stop with a dull thud, and my son walked into my house. "Dad, we're not going to make this difficult." And then he saw me. I watched it happen in stages, and I will remember it for whatever remains of my life. First the suit, then the watch, then the 2 men in dark suits standing behind my chair with badges on their belts. Then Dana, who he had never seen before, holding a tablet and looking at him the way an actuary looks at a bridge. Then the coffee in my hand, which was not shaking. Vanessa came in behind him and stopped so abruptly that Kellerman collided with her shoulder. "Good morning," I said. Nobody answered. "Please come in," I said. "You have a key." Kellerman recovered first, because Kellerman was a professional, and professionals reach for the script. "Mr. Hensley, this property has been legally—" "Mr. Kellerman." I did not raise my voice. "The gentleman on the left is Special Agent Reyes. The gentleman on the right is Special Agent Okonkwo. They've been very interested in the notarial seal on your power of attorney, specifically the date on it." Kellerman's mouth stayed open. Nothing came out of it. "August 14th, I said. "The date I supposedly stood in an office in this city and signed away my home." I set my coffee down on the side table. I was in the Gulf of Alaska, 2,000 miles out, past every tower on the continent. There's a passenger manifest with my name typed on it, a charter captain, a 2-man crew, and 15 fishermen who watched me lose a 40-minute argument with a halibut. I looked at him. "You notarized my appearance in a room I was not in. That's not a mistake, counselor. That's a signature on a felony." Kellerman sat down, not in a chair. He simply stopped standing and folded onto my floor, and put his face in his hands, and made a sound I had not expected to hear from a grown man. Vanessa exploded. She came 3 steps into my living room, screaming that this was her property, that I was trespassing, that she would have all of us removed, her voice climbing into a register that shook. I did not raise my voice to meet hers. I reached into my jacket, took out my phone, tapped the screen once to pair it with the surround system I had installed in this room years ago to listen to Eleanor's records. And I pressed play. Vanessa's own voice filled my living room at concert volume. "I found a place. It's off the books. It's 10 miles north of the line, and they cater specifically to families who need an elderly relative to quietly stop being a problem. She recoiled as though she had been whipped. Both hands went over her mouth. The recording did not stop. $5 million, it's ironclad. If he passes naturally in a care facility, under documented medical supervision, the payout is expedited and unquestioned. Within a month, his heart fails under the chemical stress. It's natural, it's documented. And then into my own living room, in my own house, my son's voice. Okay, we send him to the border. I watched the color leave Bradley's face. It did not drain, it left all at once, and what was underneath was gray. His knees gave, and he caught the edge of the foyer table with one hand and hung there. I stopped the playback. The silence afterward was enormous. You thought you were clever, I said quietly. You thought a human life was a line item you could move to make a spreadsheet balance. You planned to have your father chemically executed to cover a series of catastrophically stupid bets. And you were confident because you looked at me and saw a fixed pension and a pickup truck and gray hair, and you concluded there was nothing behind them. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. You saw the financial profile I curated for public consumption, I said. You saw the account I used to buy groceries and pay property taxes. What you never saw, because your greed was too shallow to look, is that your mother's patents sold for $90 million, and every dollar of it has been sitting in a trust with my name on it for 11 years. Bradley made a small sound, a wounded animal noise. I want you to understand what that noise was. It was not remorse. I have replayed it 1,000 times, and I am certain. It was the sound of a man realizing that he had sold his father, his soul, and the rest of his life for pennies, while standing on top of a mountain of gold that would have been his in 15 years for the price of simply being decent. I reached into my jacket and took out a folded stack of documents and dropped them on the coffee table, where they landed with a flat, final sound. These are the original promissory notes from Detroit, I said. At midnight, I authorized a buyout of your entire criminal portfolio. Full principal, cash, no negotiation. They took it in 4 minutes and thanked us for the convenience. Vanessa's eyes went to the papers, then to the agents, then to my face. Detroit is gone, I said. You are free of them. You owe them nothing. I paused. You owe $2.5 million to me. The first payment was due at 8 o'clock this morning. It is now 8:11. Dad, the loan is in default, I said. The holding company is exercising its right to immediate asset seizure, the penthouse, the vehicles, the margin accounts. The offshore holding account Vanessa opened in March that she has not mentioned to you. I saw Bradley's head turn toward his wife and I let him have that. You are bankrupt, completely, and as of this morning, permanently. And for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, forgery of a notarized instrument, insurance fraud, and elder abuse, these gentlemen are going to take you to a federal building, and you are going to spend a very long time explaining a recording that you cannot explain. Vanessa broke. She went down onto the Persian rug with a shriek that rang off the ceiling, hands clawing at the weave, hyperventilating. The polished woman who had, 72 hours earlier, calculated the schedule of my death, was reduced on my floor to a terrified animal in a trap. And she did not look at me. She twisted her wet face toward her husband. This is your fault, she screamed. You told me he was a clueless old man. You promised me this would be clean. You dragged me into your family's pathetic. Bradley did not even hear her. His universe had inverted and he was still falling through it. He looked at the notes on the table, and at the agents, and finally at me. And then my son fell to his knees and began to crawl across my living room floor. He came all the way to my chair. He reached up with shaking hands and took hold of the fabric at my knees, and looked up at me with his face wet and ruined. Dad, please. His voice had gone to a high, pathetic whimper. Dad, you can't do this. You can't send me to federal prison. I'm your only boy. I was desperate. They were going to kill me, Dad. They were going to take everything. I panicked. I made a mistake. But I'm still your blood, please. Look at me. I'm your son. Give me a second chance. I'll pay back every cent. And I looked down at him. I want to tell you what I saw, because it is not what I expected to see. For 1 second, I saw a small boy with sunburned shoulders on a bicycle in that driveway, 40 feet from where we were, wobbling and shrieking with joy while I ran alongside with my hand on the seat, promising him I would not let go. I had not let go. I had never let go. That was, I understand now, the entire problem. I reached down and took his wrists. You stopped being my son, I said. The moment you priced what was left of my life at $5 million. I lifted his hands off my suit and set them down. I did not shove him. I simply took his hands off me, the way you take a child's hand off a hot surface. You stopped being my blood the second you told a van to carry me to a warehouse. You didn't make a mistake, Bradley. A mistake is the burner you left on. And you didn't even make that mistake. You made it on purpose 6 weeks ago, so that when this morning came, everyone would believe I'd wandered off. My voice did not rise. That is the thing I remember most. It did not rise once. You made a choice. A financial choice, with a number attached to it. And now you're going to pay the price of the transaction. Because that's what you told the world a life is worth, and the world heard you. I nodded to the agents. They moved with a smooth, terrible efficiency. The one on the left took Bradley by the collar and brought him to his feet and swept his arms behind him in one motion, and the click of the cuffs closing was the loudest sound in the room. The second agent went to Vanessa and ignored her thrashing entirely and secured her wrists with the same indifference you'd use on a filing cabinet. Kellerman, still on my floor, was hauled up by a third agent who had come in through the kitchen. I did not stay to hear the rights read. I stood, took one steadying breath, buttoned my jacket, and turned my back on the ruins of my family and walked out my own front door into the morning. Dana fell into step beside me on the porch. Outside, the two movers hired to empty my house were leaning against the truck's bumper, smoking, staring at the federal vehicles now blocking the street with expressions of profound confusion. I did not look at them. I walked down my own driveway with my back straight and my head up, past the oak Eleanor planted the year my son was born, and I got into the back of a black car that had been idling at the curb since 7. Dana got in beside me and pulled out her tablet and started untangling what was left of my son's empire. And I looked out the tinted window at my house, and I waited to feel triumphant. I want to be very clear with you, because this is the only part of this story that has ever actually mattered. I did not. That was 14 months ago. I am going to tell you what happened afterward, and then I am going to tell you the thing I actually learned, which took me a great deal longer to arrive at than the verdict did. Vanessa took a plea, 22 years, federal, no parole. Arthur Kellerman was disbarred within the month and is serving 9 years. He cooperated fully and immediately, which is what a man does when his entire professional identity was rented. The notary lost her commission and her freedom. Bradley went to trial, against the advice of everyone, because he believed a jury would look at his face and see what I had spent 40 years seeing. They did not. They heard 11 seconds of a recording, and then they heard him say, "Okay," and it took them 4 hours. He is 39 years old. He will be 63 when he comes out. I did not attend the sentencing. I have not visited. He writes to me. I have not answered, and I do not know yet whether that is strength or cowardice, and I have stopped pretending those two things are always easy to tell apart. The trust is mostly gone now, which is the part nobody expects. I put 60 million of it into a foundation that funds forensic accounting and legal representation for elderly victims of financial exploitation by their own families. Because in the year I spent working with prosecutors, I learned a number that has never let go of me. The overwhelming majority of elder financial abuse in this country is not committed by strangers on telephones. It is committed by children, by the people whose names are already on the paperwork, and almost none of it is ever reported, because reporting it requires an old person to walk into a police station and say the sentence, "My son is stealing from me," out loud, and most of them would genuinely rather die than say it. Some of them do. Here is what I have learned. It took me a year, and it is not what I thought it would be. The first thing is the one I already knew and had refused to look at, which is that I saw it coming. Not the murder. I want to be fair to myself. Nobody sees that coming. But the rest of it, the entitlement, the hollowness, the way Bradley had always been able to produce exactly the emotion a room required, and never seemed to be carrying any of his own. I had watched that assemble itself over 30 years, and I had called it charm. I had called it ambition. Every time he took something and gave nothing, I told myself he was finding his feet. I did not hide $90 million from my son because I was wise. I have told this story as though the trust was some masterstroke of paternal philosophy, and that is a lie I have been telling in the flattering direction. The truth is that some quiet, unarticulated part of me had known for a very long time that my son could not be trusted with money, and rather than say that out loud, rather than sit him down at 30 and tell him what I saw. I built a secret and lived inside it for 11 years and called it a lesson I was teaching him. I was not teaching him anything. I was avoiding a conversation, and a secret is not a boundary. A boundary is something you say to someone's face. The second thing is harder. I have been asked, more than once, whether I would do it the same way. Whether I would still have waited. Whether I would still have let it run all the way to the moving truck and the handcuffs, instead of calling the bureau on Tuesday afternoon and letting it end quietly. And for a long time I said yes, of course, obviously. I needed the evidence. I needed the recording. No one would have believed me otherwise. All of which is true, but it is not the whole truth. And you deserve the whole truth, or there is no point in my telling you any of this. The whole truth is that somewhere around Thursday night this stopped being about survival. I had the notary date by Tuesday afternoon. I had a provable federal forgery and an ironclad alibi, and a woman on a satellite phone begging me to let her make one call. I could have ended it there, safely, from my own kitchen, with my life entirely intact. I didn't, because I wanted to see his face. I bought $2.5 million of criminal debt in the middle of the night, not because it protected me. It did not protect at all. The FBI protected me. But because I wanted to be the one holding the axe. I wanted to walk him through it. I wanted him on his knees on my floor, and I got all of it. I got every single thing I wanted, exactly the way I had designed it. And I sat in that car afterward and felt nothing but tired. That is the part I need you to hear, because it is the only useful thing in this entire story. Revenge is not a meal. It does not feed you. It is a transaction. And the currency you pay in is the part of yourself that was still capable of being surprised by cruelty. When you spend 72 hours thinking the way they think, in leverage and pressure, and the calculation of another person's weakness, you become fluent in it. And fluency does not leave you when the handcuffs close. I am 71 years old and I can still feel it in me. I look at people differently now. I see the leverage first. I did not have that before Tuesday, and I have not been able to put it down since. They took my house, my pension, and my son. I let them take one more thing, and I handed it over myself, and I did it with my eyes open. So if you are listening to this, and there is someone in your life who has begun to look at you as a problem to be solved, and I know there are people listening to this who know exactly what I am describing, who have been feeling it for months, and have not said it out loud to anyone. Here is what I would tell you, and it is not what the first 3 days of this story would suggest. Protect yourself immediately. Do not wait. Do not investigate. Do not build a case. Call a lawyer. Call the authorities. Call a person outside the family and say the sentence out loud. Today, even if you are wrong, especially if you are ashamed. The shame is the mechanism. The shame is the whole reason it works. They are counting on the fact that you would rather be robbed than be humiliated, and they are usually right, and that is how they win. And then, and this is the harder half, do not do what I did next. Do not stay in the room with it longer than survival requires. Do not build the machine. Get out, get safe, and let people whose job it is to be cold on your behalf, and go and be warm somewhere else while they do it. There is no version of the ending where you watch them fall and feel whole afterward. I looked. I had $90 million in the best people money can buy, and a perfect, flawless, beautifully engineered plan, and I want to tell you honestly. The trap worked perfectly and it caught 2 people. Blood is not loyalty. Blood is a fact about biology and nothing else. Loyalty is a behavior, and it is demonstrated daily or it does not exist, and a person who is never demonstrated it does not become loyal because they share your last name. My son believed my age made me weak and my silence made me a fool. He was wrong about the first and right about the second, and the silence was mine. I chose it for 11 years because it was easier than the conversation. The hardest lesson I have ever learned is that you cannot save a person who is actively working to destroy you. And the second hardest is that when you finally stop trying, you will not feel free. You will just feel quiet. And quiet, it turns out, is enough. It is not what I wanted. It is what there is, and I have made a life in it. And the ferns on the back porch are still alive, and Eleanor would find that funny. If any of this landed somewhere true in you, hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. There are more of these than I ever expected there to be. And I would like to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Or is someone in your life beginning to treat you like a problem right now? Say it in the comments. Say it out loud to somebody. That is the entire point. I read every single one. Thank you for staying with me. Take care of yourselves out there. This story is my own, written in my own words, in my own voice over a long time, by a human being who lived it and has thought about very little else since. The names of every person and place in it have been changed, and certain details have been altered, to protect the privacy of people who did not choose to be in this story, and to comply with the terms of ongoing legal proceedings. What I have not changed is any of what it felt like. The reflections here are mine and mine alone. I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. If you recognize yourself in any part of it, please talk to someone qualified, and please do it sooner than I did.